Yo, right across the internet, I could up on your mobile phone, I could up on your social media platform. This is Jambo Radio, www.jamboradio.co.uk. We're multilingual, we're conversational, in the languages where you understand. We are Jambo Radio, inspiring transformation.
Hello and welcome to Moments with Sade and Enoch on Jambo Radio.
Hello, everyone. Hello.
My name is Enoch. Sade has introduced herself. And we've got the amazing Laura Maccrum here with us today. And on today's show, we'll be talking about growing up black in Scotland's 1970s and 1980s. We're not telling you how old Laura is. Don't use a calculator. Why not join us in the conversation? You can do this by calling the studio directly on 0141 530 2787. However, if you don't want to call, you can send us a WhatsApp on 074 5990 6822.
And if you're on social media, you can also message us on Facebook at Jambo Radio Scotland, on Twitter at Jambo Radio 1, and on Instagram at jamboradio.scotland.
You can also, if you don't use social media,
it's so funny whenever I say that. If you don't use social media.
If you use social media like me, you can send us an email at info@jamboradio.co.uk. Send us your comments. We'd like to hear from you. We'd like you to send, if there's anything myself, Sade or Laura is saying that you don't like, send us a comment. Challenge us. Let's get into a proper conversation. All right. And if you haven't yet. If you don't have the app yet on your phone, the Jambo Radio app is on Android and it's on Apple, so you can go on any of those platforms to download the app and listen to all the shows that you've missed. Right. So there's a growing number of black people in Scotland, right? It's unbelievable. So I've been in Scotland for 20 years. I've been in Scotland for 17 years, and I came here in those days when if you saw a black person in the city center, you nod your head. But we're now in 2024, when if you see a black person, you just walk past it.
Like you hide sometimes.
Yeah,
you hide sometimes.
Yeah, I just hide right.
I don't want to have a conversation today. Not today.
The census puts black people in Scotland in 2001 at 8,000, and in 2011 that number had gone up to 36,000. So I'm thinking, we all gave our details out in 2022, which is almost 2 years ago. We're still waiting for the result. If I'm a betting man, I would think the number is probably around 100,000 now. Do you want to place bet how many?
Okay.
So we were 36,000 in 2011. Where do you think we are now?
I would say 120 maybe.
120, okay.
I'm going to go on a conservative 95,000.
95.
Just to throw in.
Okay, so when the official number comes out, we shall catch up, and whoever wins that £1 bet is will be given the bet.
The coffee's on me.
And it's amazing because most of the number, the 8,000, the 36,000, most of them are black Africans. I think about 80% of them are black Africans. Black folks have lived in Scotland for centuries, and today we will be listening to Laura, who has not lived there for centuries, but just shut up that. She was born in Scotland in the 70s and 80s, and we want to find out what growing up in Scotland as a black person is, back in the 70s and 80s. So
take us back.
There you go.
Yes. So yes, take us back indeed. I would want you to tell our listeners who Laura is without talking about what you do for work. So say in less than a minute, just who is Laura?
Who is Laura? Laura is, I'm very happy to say my age because I have lived every year of my life. So I'm proud to say that I'm 45 years old. I was born in 1978 here in Scotland. Who am I? I am a daughter. I am a mother. I am an aunt. I'm a sister. I am very... I have a lot of love and care for my family. We're tight knit. I'm a creative. I love intellectual conversations. I'm an activist. I'm a fighter. I'm a dreamer. I've done quite a few different things in my life and in my career, and I'm at a point in my life now where I've grown to be proud of each and every one of them, even the things that were not successful. I still take pride in, because of the fact that it was a path and a learning and a journey that has got me to where I am right now. I don't have everything figured out, but what I'm really enjoying is the process of figuring everything out and that journey. So that's who I am without talking about my work.
Fantastic,
Thank
fantastic.
you.
And so, Laura, you sound like a free-spirited person, like
Yes.
easy, just happy, vibey, loving the world.
Yes.
It would be interesting to know, take you back a bit. So your parents, because we're talking earlier, you are giving me some Kenyan vibes. So give us a bit about that. If your parents are Kenyans, how did you end up here?
Of course. So my mother is from Kenya, from Nyeri Karatina, which is up country in Kenya, and actually near an area in Kenya called the Scottish Highlands, because
Would you believe
so
it?
many, I know, would you believe it? Because so many Scots settled there.
All right.
And particularly with the missionaries and coming through churches and so on. So my mother, before even knowing or visiting Scotland, had a lot of
Scottish
influences. Yes.
Right.
My father is white Scottish, he's not with us anymore, but he is possibly the whitest African that you're ever going to meet. Like people would,
Probably
especially in
more African than
Kenya.
Sade.
Do you know? Seriously,
Probably more African than Sade.
We would be in Kenya, and people would say that this Mzungu is more African. There's like his Kiswahili is better than
Wow.
So he really fell in love with Kenya, and he was a teacher, and my mother was a teacher, and they were both teaching in the same school in Nairobi, which is where they met way back in the 60s.
So were they really teaching, or were they up to something
I
else?
think,
I don't know. They didn't check the results of the kids
This
from
is
those
what I'm
years.
saying. It's funny you say that, because as a child I had this like romantic image of them falling in love. Okay, so I read a lot of like Jane Eyre and stuff like that, of falling in love over a blackboard, like dusters missing,
Like
and all this
hiding
kind of
from the
stuff.
principal.
Yeah, I know. Can you imagine?
Enoch doesn't have a church mind. Honestly, that's one thing you need to know.
Noted. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
But yeah, so they met there. They were teaching in the same school. My older brothers were born in Kenya, but we moved in the early 70s. I wasn't born yet. Back to Scotland, and the main reason my parents took that decision was that they wanted myself and my brothers to have British qualifications when it came to schooling.
Okay.
So the schools in Kenya were and are excellent, but you know the story that you can have qualifications from somewhere in Africa and you come here. So this is exactly. We're preaching here, preach. So we came over. My mum was actually pregnant with me when they came over, and so that changed everything in our lives. And it was interesting for all of us. We were in the 70s a mixed race family with a black African woman and a white Scottish man. It was very
unusual.
rare.
It's usually the other way around.
Yes.
Yep.
And we faced a lot of stigma, a lot of discrimination. And I'll get into that in a little bit, but one of the things that I first became aware of was, so my father had told my mum and my older brothers about how welcoming Scotland is, because Scotland is known as a welcoming country. So to a white man, what else are you going to think, you know? So he's telling his wife and children what a wonderful place this is.
You guys will love it.
So, I mean, they all boarded a plane, you know, with wide-eyed enthusiasm.
She'd never been before.
No,
Right.
had not been before. So this is early 70s.
Yeah.
So she hadn't been before. Boarded a plane with kind of wide-eyed enthusiasm and landed here in Scotland to a very, very different reception. And if you ever speak to my mum, she famously says in that 8-hour flight she lost everything. She lost her identity. She lost her multiple degrees at university suddenly weren't worth the paper that they were on. Status. She had very good status living in Kenya, especially as a teacher. It was a comfortable position.
Yep.
And so coming from a very nice lifestyle in Kenya to a very small town called Armadale, which and if there's anyone from Armadale listening, please do not take any offence.
You're about to offend them.
Yeah, I'm about to offend you. Armadale's a very different village now from what it was back in the 70s.
Because Armadale is somewhere near Livingston, right?
It's West Lothian.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. It's West Lothian. It's partly because my father took a role teaching in Armadale Academy, so that's where we ended up.
Okay.
So yes, imagine beautiful house and gardens and everything, tiny little horrible council house with neighbours who did not like you, and it was a very different lifestyle.
And how old were your brothers at this?
So my brother is 5 years older than me. My closest brother in age, so he would have been about 5 when I was born.
Okay.
And even for him as well, I think everybody was in shock. Of having had that first life experience.
Exactly. I think I just want to pick up on that. So at what age, what point did you start realizing that things are actually very different here? So what was your early childhood memories like?
So early childhood memories, I think I was very aware from a very early age, because my parents did that to arm us, to protect us. Forewarned is forearmed. So if you imagine at the time, I'm a baby, my brother's 5, my older brothers weren't with us at this point.
Oh, right.
So for us, we are children. No, of course.
So how many older brothers do you have?
I have 2, a large family. Yes, 2 older brothers. 1 older sister. And then there's my closest brother in age. So large family.
Your dad, your mom, she was pregnant with yourself, then your closest brother.
Yes.
So you had 3 siblings left in Kenya.
No, so we were actually a lot older. So one was studying somewhere else, one is now in Canada. So we were kind of spreading about at this point.
You came pretty late.
I
Then.
did.
Yeah.
I did. I definitely was, and my brothers always let me know that. Yeah, I was never allowed to get away with that. You know, don't try this baby of the family stuff. It doesn't work with us.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, to answer your question, I knew from a very early age, because we were taught how to protect ourselves. My brother, closest in age brother, he was really the first to experience the racism, the discrimination, the fighting, all of that kind of stuff. And he took on the role as my protector. And that's how we were, and probably still are, if I'm being honest with you, right through our childhood. We were always being cautious, always having to protect yourself, thinking about which route you went to school and then which route you came home, because sometimes there would be kids waiting on a certain route. Who
really, like young kids.
Wow.
Yeah, there were beatings.
Wow.
You know, people spitting on you in the street, throwing stuff at us, putting dogs' stuff in our garden.
Wow.
My mum, at one point, when I was a baby, in the pram, she was walking on the main street, and she wasn't allowed to walk on the pavement by a group of white men, who she had to walk through oncoming traffic with me in a pram.
Wow.
Because they wouldn't allow her to walk on the pavement. So and just like the daily constant things of people making monkey noises and you know, stuff like that. Funnily enough, I was talking to a friend about this the other day there. I remember in primary school, I let a friend copy my homework. Such a people pleaser back then. And I got into trouble. And the teacher was saying,
you have
cheated. Yeah, you cheated, right?
Oh, you.
So, and I was shocked by the whole thing, because I was like, what is going on here? My friend got really upset that I got into trouble, and she said, no, it was me, right? The teacher still would not believe her.
Listening.
The teacher was convinced that I had somehow manipulated this other person
to take
her homework and then for her to take the fall. And so this continued to the point where the other girl got her parents involved, and the school were still the head teacher actually eventually was like, we needed to drop this. Like,
it's getting ridiculous.
This is getting ridiculous now. But there were many things like that happened. I remember my mum could probably tell you the story better, but the police came to our door, and a window had been broken in our neighbourhood, and everybody straight away was like, it's the black kids. It's the Maccrum kids. No. It must be them. So the police came to our door, very haughty, and, you know, your children have been breaking windows and everything. And my mother, she's such a G. She let them say everything that they were going to say, and she said, well, that's very interesting because my children are actually at school camp. They're not even here. They're away, you know. But that just shows you the level of, so that's slightly different than overt racism. That's more like institutionalized, where the natural assumption is,
yes.
Things go missing at school, our bags get checked. Yeah, and this is what I grew up with. But looking back, something that I'm very proud of, or I'm trying to be more proud of now, is that helped me excel. That helped me move forward. Because if I always was academically doing well, if I was always proving, if I was always on time, if my uniform was always, then I set the standard to make myself untouchable. Where it's like, you cannot find anything that is wrong with me. But it has also strongly linked into my sense of injustice. Like that is something. I am not an angry person, but if you want to see me angry, then that is where we need to go in a conversation. That's the stuff that
because they made you do that. Like you could just be a child, but they took that away from you, and you had to step up.
Grow up very quickly.
And
I'm just so interested in what your mom said, just before we forget that. So you said she was the one that instilled in you and made you aware. So in terms of awareness, what was the message she was passing across at that point in time?
So my mother couldn't get a job as a teacher.
Okay.
She was told frequently, because she taught English, and she speaks the Queen's English and reads and writes, which is another thing. You know, if we ever wanted anything at home, we had to write a 200-word essay on why we should have it. This was the kind of upbringing that we had.
At what age was this?
Oh, from the minute we could walk and write. Come on.
No, I'm asking because I'm taking that home.
Yes, no, you should. I still remember, I think I must have written a 2-page thesis on why I should get ice cream, and I pulled in all of these facts about how it was a hot day and all this kind of stuff. But this was one of the
why,
we see it as a joke, but Mum was like 200-word essay on why.
Wow. Okay.
But so my mum was a teacher. Okay. She couldn't get a job as a teacher here in Scotland, and so she started to see very quickly what was happening to us at school, particularly my brother, and she changed her line of work. She kind of reinvented herself and created I guess activism was where she fell in. She started fighting. She started working on anti-racist campaigns. I remember we did the long walk for Mandela, to free Mandela, when we were kids, and everybody was like marching from London to Scotland. We didn't walk the whole walk, but you know, and every weekend we were fighting, we were campaigning for something. And you hit on the point, like my mum wanted to be a teacher and she wanted to be a writer. That's what she wanted to do with her life. She never got to do that because she changed her career to protect us as children. And that's something that I would give my life for, like to lay down your needs and your wants in that way to protect your family and your children. Yeah, that's one of the things where I'm like my mum's fiercest protector and supporter, in that sense.
So I'm thinking in all this, all this is happening, especially to you and your mom, or to you and your brother and your mom. How was your dad handling all that?
Not
that
well.
Must have been
Exactly.
Not well. He was. I don't mean not well towards us. I mean the embarrassment.
I can imagine.
Yes, the embarrassment. He felt a lot of shame himself, but he also was a very strong activist. So, like, I have these memories. Some of my fondest memories. Weekends in our house. The house would be filled with all of these different people who were campaigning for whatever the subject was. And so I would be surrounded by all of these different adults, and it was almost like Speaker's Corner in London, where the one person is like, this thing, yes, yeah, exactly. So I always say I grew up at the feet of activists, and I would sit there and watch and listen, and I was just in awe by the work they were doing.
In the 80s.
Early 80s, early 80s, and so like Mum challenging the first murder of Ammar Ahmed, because that wasn't classed as a racist murder, and Mum and her other troops fought through the police and through the courts until it was identified, and also for his family. Yeah, because this is one of the things that Mum noticed early on, is the importance of having us documented here. So if you want to get funding, if you want to get support for your project, you have to prove that you have people that are going to use it. So like the early censuses, and I was actually even wondering how correct that 2001 one would be, because back then there would be a lot of people that weren't So Mum and Dad worked very closely together on all of these campaigns. And
well,
as I
you
say,
were still teaching though.
Yeah. So like our Monday to Friday was school, work. Our weekends were making placards and signs, learning chants, going on marches, going around getting petitions of people, and Mum and Dad and their cohorts coming together at our house, and we would eat, and just so much food. I mean, we had a little talk earlier, but
So I'm just thinking now. So I came to Scotland or to the UK 17-20 years ago, and I know what brought people like myself and those that came around the time I came. I know what drove that migration. So what drove the migration? I mean, you've shared why your mom and dad came, but for those people around you, those people that came to yours and people that became your community, what drove their migration into the UK back then? Okay,
that's a really, really interesting question. Another one of our bases was the Afro-Caribbean Society in Edinburgh. Because Mum did actually go back to university for a while because she wanted to do a further degree that was on a British paper now. So, I'm like, honestly, I feel like if you sat at a table with my mum, she could play a game of cards with her qualifications, like,
Really?
But so through her going back to university, we became part of the Afro-Caribbean Society. And this is something that I really love as a memory from back then, and used to confuse me when I wasn't in Scotland. So back then, couple of things, right? Hand on my heart, I knew every other black person in Scotland, right? Knew them, knew their parents and their kids. But there's maybe 10 other families at that point. So we all knew each other. But driving the migration here, so there were students, was one aspect. There were other people who had also come over through, say, perhaps marriage and children, same reason that we were there as well. And there were a few of the early business kind of entrepreneurs. But those people came to Scotland, they had some kind of a link. There was somebody who was like, have you tried this place? So it was a way in. But something I really love about back then, which we lost for a period of time and we still see, is, so for me, an African was an African, right? I grew up with East Africans, West Africans, South Africans. There was no, we don't hang out with you guys, we don't do this, right? So I grew up
Just
eating biltong and pap, as they call it in South Africa, but we call it ugali in Kenya, and I know in Nigeria it's something different. So I actually had quite a cross African, an African diaspora.
You had a better experience than me, and I grew up in Africa. I'm jealous already.
But this is what I found hard, is that I would go to Africa, or I would be somewhere outside of this community, and there would be a thing that was like, pockets. And it would be like, oh, you don't hang out with Nigerians, and I'm like, why not? It's like, come on. And she's not my auntie, but I always call her auntie, is from Ghana, and she makes the best jollof rice. I know this is a fight that happens all the time.
It's a controversial one.
It's a controversial one, but she makes excellent jollof. And so for me, like that was my upbringing. Was like everybody was an auntie or an uncle, and we were all very, very close together. That has changed over the years, but that's what it was like. So we're talking late 70s, early 80s. Very, very few people, but we stuck together. It was a tight unit.
Okay.
It's good you had so many beautiful memories, albeit sometimes you have that. So can you just remember, like, very quickly, like a memory you have of being treated unfairly, due to looking different?
Okay. There's so many to choose from.
Really?
There really are, but I can tell you one which is interesting, because we're in a radio station right now, right? And I worked in radio for a very long time, and there was a point where I had my own radio show.
Wow.
Now, my name, Laura Maccrum, is the whitest name that you're ever going to hear.
You must have really a lot of people who love shockers.
Yes. My accent... okay, I can put on an accent if I need to, but my natural accent is Edinburgh Scottish. So when you'd hear me on the radio, you wouldn't think
twice.
No,
you just
wouldn't.
Think, that's Laura.
Yeah. But so circling around that, I went for a job interview once. And I arrived... Okay, so this is more funny than hurtful, but I think it's a good illustration. I arrived at the reception to check in for the job interview, and the receptionist is like, hi, sure, name? So I said Laura Maccrum, and she looked down at the bit of paper, and then she looked back up at me, and she was like, name? Laura Maccrum. And she looked down at the bit of paper, and she looked back up at me, and she said, are you sure?
Oh, no. Are you sure about your name?
Am I sure? Yeah,
Let me look at my ID.
I know. Hang on a minute.
Is that my name again?
I know. I'm sorry.
Oh, dear.
So... And I share that because we can laugh about that, but there are so many painful situations. This wasn't directly to me, but I think it's a really good illustration of my very dear friend at the time, another mixed race girl. She was actually attacked by 4 other boys and girls from her school when they'd left school. So there's like 4 of them beating this one girl. And a police car came by. The police car took the black girl, took her aside, put her in the back of the car, and started asking her, what did you do to upset them? What did you do to, these other kids just got to run off and do whatever. But for her, it was like, well, you're obviously at fault. Yeah, what did you do? And she's sitting there with blood, and like,
as a child,
so that's... those are the kind of things.
And for these traumas, would you say it's affected you in your adult life? Like
100%.
Really?
100%. If I could jump forward on the timeline to George Floyd and the start of Black Lives Matter, I had actually been through quite a traumatic incident, which we're not going to discuss today. And I was I was faced with my own mortality, and I was reevaluating my life. And then we see George Floyd and we see Black Lives Matter. I hadn't realised that for many, many years, I have just been pushing down and subduing all of that trauma from my childhood and all of those decades throughout. So in my mind, I thought, I'm really strong. I'm coping really well. All I'd done was just push it away. I hadn't dealt with it yet. When Black Lives Matter started and you start seeing people sharing their stories and you start feeling an identification and that communication, it brought back, and to the point of like post-traumatic stress, it brought back in HD, Technicolor, surround sound, all of these things that happened to me as a child, that happened to my brother as a child, that happened to my mum, that happened to my father, you know, like they all came flooding back to a point where I actually couldn't breathe. I was having panic attacks. I mean, this is during COVID as well, so there was a lot going on. But I was really struggling to process all of this. And then I went from trauma response to anger, because all of a sudden you're seeing these people. I saw somebody on Facebook that used to call me names in the street turning their Facebook picture black, supporting Black Lives Matter, and I'm like, oh really? You know, so like the anger came out as well, where I'm like, all of these years we have been fighting and nobody has been listening. Not nobody, few people have been listening. And now all of a sudden, and I'm not in any way saying that to take away from the fact that a man lost his life, but that the Black Lives Matter moment was very traumatic for me. And it actually made me reevaluate where I was at in my life, where I was at in my career, and change my direction, which we can talk about if you want in a bit. But yeah, that was a big change. Yeah,
it's interesting you said that, and you know it's painful, and sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
It's funny growing up in Nigeria. This life is funny, right? Growing up in Nigeria, we had life so tough. We always thought those guys in the UK must be balling. You know, like they've got everything and whatnot, but then you had their own challenges as well. We just have different kinds of challenges.
Exactly.
You know, we've got bad governments and all that. We've got racists and all that attacking you every day. So I was going to ask something, but you sort of started answering it, because I always thought all these people that do these nasty things when they were 7, 8, 9 year old, do you see them later on?
Oh yeah.
So how has that been?
It's very much been a thing of forgiveness and moving on, because I think a lot of there are so many degrees of racism that I call that the low level stuff, right? So those kids were saying what they heard
Mom and Dad,
we're saying at the time, think of the television and radio networks, you know, we had programs where they were openly using the N-word and stuff, you know, so it was kind of like, this is normal.
This is what you say.
So a lot of those kids really just didn't know any better. And I always have two rules for that when I encounter racism: is children, completely forgivable, they have an opportunity to learn. Old people will be dead soon, so I'm not going to waste my time on them. So that's weird. So if I encounter racism from either of those two groups, I'm sorry, that may sound incredibly callous, but it is very important that you protect yourself in this fight, because it takes a lot out of you. But like, I had a similar thing with my family back in Kenya, who I call it the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air effect, right? I swear they thought I lived in Uncle Phil's mansion, right? And every time that I would go over, I learned quickly. I used to go and I would like take my best clothes and stuff like that. And if I did, they would all be gone before I came back. So I'm like, this Adidas t-shirt that I worked really hard for, when I say work, doing all my chores and everything, and I saved up the £12 or whatever it was, I'm not taking this because I know it's going to get taken off of me as soon as I get back there. But there was a really lovely moment I had with my cousin, who's actually coming this week. I'm very excited about that. Where I was talking to her and her husband about some of the racism that I've experienced in Scotland. So this is a good, I think I was like 18, 19, 20, that age. So I was having a conversation with her, and she was so shocked, like she had no idea. And she was actually, you know, we've been thinking all this time that you guys are like living in a palace. Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, are you kidding? Like, for I don't think I had my own bedroom until I was like close to puberty, and my mum's like, right, we need to do something about it. Exactly. No, we cannot have these. It's either there's going to be bloodshed or there's going to be fighting. So you know that, like, there's things like that. And, you know, I remember, I correct myself. I don't remember, but my mum has told me of how there were times that we were so poor, we had no money at all, that one day I said to my mum, Mum said we didn't have any milk that morning, and I was like, "It's okay, Mum, I'll have water on my cereal." And she's like, "Who is this child?" Like, how did that? But that's just how it was. You know, we didn't have the things. I certainly didn't have the things that my friends had. Yeah, and any kid that's in that situation knows how, you know.
Because one of the challenges for you was your mom still couldn't sort of properly kick off her career, and we'll pick up on that. But before we continue, let me remind our listeners on how they can get in touch with their comments and contribution. Join in conversation. You can do this by calling the studio on 0141 530 2787. If you don't like getting on the phone, you can WhatsApp or voice message. Actually, if you don't like getting on the phone, then you can text us on WhatsApp. It's 0745 990 6822.
And if you're on social media, you can always message us on Facebook at Jambo Radio Scotland, on Twitter at Jambo Radio 1, and on Instagram at Jambo Radio.Scotland. You can also email us using info@jamboradio.co.uk.
Yeah, so welcome back. Today we're talking about growing up black in Scotland in the 70s and 80s, and Laura has been taking us through some traumatic and joyful experience at the same time, because ultimately you still had a generally joyful childhood. And you know, so what I was going to ask next, it's a very touchy subject. So because all that was happening, you guys were living relatively well in Kenya, and Dad said, "Oh, Scotland is great, let's go to Scotland." You arrived in Scotland, all that was happening to you kids. Mom couldn't really kick off her career. There must have been friction in the house. And the reason why I ask that, and I want to, if you can, share some of the ways that was dealt with, because believe it or not, that is still happening today.
Yeah. Sure.
Where for some reason families
scale,
families have found themselves in Scotland. One is thinking, let's go back. The other is saying, let's stay and just tough it out. And there's this friction going on. So how were your parents able to sort of get past that?
Navigate that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. We have always been quite an open and communicative family. I think that's from having two teachers, a mother and father.
Writing essays.
You want a Mars bar? I want 3 sentences on why you should get one. Yes. So definitely striving from both of them. It wasn't easy. I don't want to paint it to be like a Disney fairy tale, but I do know that was probably the first time that my dad really understood racism, because he'd grown up in Scotland, had an opportunity as a teacher to go and teach in East Africa. Went there, fell in love with the place, and like really engraced himself into the culture and the community, and you know, all of that. So I don't even think he really wanted to come back to Scotland. I don't know for sure, but my guess is just from how happy that we always were when we were in Kenya. So the shock of coming to a different place, my mum not having family around, and back then there was no WhatsApp, there was no FaceTime. You know, if we were calling Kenya, right, it would have been planned ahead, probably in a letter, that on this date and at this time there would be a call coming through, and we would be in the house and around the phone, and then the phone would be getting passed around, you know, that kind of thing. So we didn't have the same kind of connection. But one thing I do remember is my dad he moved his career into race equality and counselling, education. So he was still as a teacher, but they weren't yet teaching race equality in schools. So my dad became one of the first teachers. And interestingly, at the time, I suppose it's not so much interesting. It made sense that it would have been a white man teaching the subject, because it was very hard to get
Like
there-
your
yeah,
mom.
exactly.
Yeah.
There were times where we
Yeah.
had to find allies, right? People use the word allies and allyship now a lot, and I think it does a little bit of disservice to the people that came
The proper allies.
proper
Yeah.
allies. Yeah. So yeah, it had to be about communication, and it had to be about where's this friction coming from? Let's discuss it. So as I say, it wasn't smooth sailing, and there were a lot of times. There was a lot of heartache and heartbreak at home, and yeah, I mean, even things like I remember like wanting to protect my mum from racism, so I didn't want her to know that someone had called me a name that day, or my brother got into a fight and there would be like blood on the school. So like we started hiding things, you know, because we didn't want them to have to suffer more. And I'm sure at the same time they were also hiding things because they didn't want us to, you know. So yeah, that's a good question though.
Yep. Thank you very much, and thanks for being open. Because it's happening. Still, lots of people are migrating to Scotland, especially to be specific, a lot of Nigerians are relocating to Scotland, and they're getting to that point where it is challenging. And for some of them, they've sacrificed a really good job in Nigeria, but they've moved to Nigeria. Similar to you guys, they moved to Nigeria because of their. I mean, they've moved to Scotland because of their children. So now the going is getting tough,
and they're beginning to think,
and the real high earner in say Nigeria is thinking, why am I suffering myself here? I can just go back home. And then there's that struggle going on. So thanks for sharing that.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
Well, in that context, I would say the question that you would need to ask yourself is about the importance of legacy. Because as I said, like I would give my life for everything that my parents have done for me to allow me to have the education that I have, the life that I've had. The and I say this in inverted commas, but the luxuries that I experience now. Now we are at a point where we can look back and say, yes, it was worth it. So the question that I would encourage anybody listening who's thinking about this is to ask yourself, what is it about like the legacy that you're looking to do? And that's not me saying put it all on your kids, do you know what I mean?
You need to think about it from that perspective.
Yes, correct. And the other thing is, like, looking at it now, I am in a very fortunate situation where I can claim dual heritage. But had we stayed in Kenya...
It's funny, I was just going to ask you that.
Were you about to?
No, please go ahead, that's fine,
But had we stayed in Kenya, then that probably wouldn't be an opportunity for me. So that is another...
So I guess, so where do you consider your home? Like Scotland? Kenya?
I love this question. I call myself African Scottish. In fact, that was the company that I set up was Urban Scots.
Okay.
I call myself African Scottish, and the only reason African comes first is because I put them alphabetically, because I cannot stand to choose which is more important to me, because they're both very much in my heart. Important, but I also believe that people shouldn't have to have a single identity. You know, I think it's very important that we can actually claim
just multiple.
As many different,
especially in the world we live in now, where everything is all there's no mono anymore.
Exactly. I'm just very glad that Scotland and Kenya have never made it to the World Cup, because then I would have a problem. That is
the chances of those two of that happening.
So I'm safe. I'm very safe.
Well, so you're in good company. Thank God you're not Nigerian, Scottish. Then that is a likelihood.
Oh dear. Okay.
But moving it forward now, I'm thinking, so that was all 70s, 80s, and then you've gone on to become a parent yourself, and you've brought up your kid in Scotland?
Yes, mostly in Scotland, yeah.
So tell us about that experience versus...
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm saying that is I'm trying to understand what has happened in the last, from you moving to Scotland and having your kid, what change has happened? I guess, and part of that to be some of the amazing work your mom, your dad, and all those.
Yeah. So the best story that I can tell to illustrate this was my daughter's first day at school. So tiny baby girl child, 5 years old.
5 years old, P1.
5 years old, primary one.
P1, yeah.
And she had her hair in pigtails and she had a uniform on, and we're at the school gate, right? And I prepped her as if she was about to go
ready for
war, right? So I'm like,
oh my
okay.
God. If
someone says this to you, you say that back, right? And then if somebody does this, and don't be afraid to go and tell the teacher. I was almost at prison. I almost went into prison guard rules where I'm like, find the biggest kid and take them down first. You know? That was what I prepped for.
And your reputation.
Wow.
And then she comes home. It's 12:30, you know, because they only do a half day. Yeah. She's skipping out and she's like, "Mummy, everyone was lovely."
Did you cry?
What have I done? No, I was like more worried about what I had done, because that child could have taken out somebody. I was like, this is because I'm prepping her, and I guess it's the same way that my mum was like prepping us as well. But that was the first time that I really started to look around and take account of things that were changing in Scotland. A lot of work that Mum had done was around amendments on the Race Equality Act, the 1978 Race Equality Act. So a lot of the campaigning was around changing that, as well as global campaigning on a more basic level, not basic, I'm sorry, on a more like closer geographical microcosm of where we were at home. She was fighting for us to have an identity, for us to have a place, for us to be recognised. And so I started looking around after this incident with my daughter at school, and started to become really fiercely proud of Scotland, because Scotland has led the way on changing in its race equality policies. Same with civil rights, gay rights, multi-family breakdown. There's no longer a nuclear family. Scotland has been the forefront of that. Now, I think a lot of things happened. We had a devolved government, which means that we're no longer having to campaign to Westminster. We can campaign very closely here. But they were also prepared to listen. The government brought in my mother as a consultant towards the end of her career, on violence against women, on race equality, on gender, and in the Gender and Equalities Unit, because of the fact that she had been such a part of things that had changed over the years. And at that point, I started looking around. In fact, I remember we were at a Pride event, and the speaker actually took time to identify that the LGBTQ community would not be experiencing the freedoms that they were now had it not been for the race equality movement, because they got to copy and paste what was going on there based on our human rights, and they did. They identified my mum as one of these people that, and that for me was when it hit me like, hang on a minute, like this is actually really quite huge what's going on. So to see my daughter going through school and only having to deal with kid stuff, you know, exactly, like, oh, I'm sorry, are you upset that you don't have the same trainers that other people do? Oh dear.
Tough life.
But okay, that's not fair. If my daughter's listening, I'm 100% joking.
It's all relative, isn't it?
Yeah. But like, she experienced things like, I don't know, interactions between like groups of girls where there wasn't it wasn't like she was different. It was, you know, if one girl was being mean, it's just because she was being mean. It wasn't because of racism. So you know what I mean? So yeah.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, so there definitely changes.
Fantastic. Weary of time. So I'm trying to move it forward a bit more.
Sure.
So 70s, 80s that happened.
No.
Then about 2 decades ago, what you just shared happened. Your daughter came around, and now we are in 2024.
Yes.
How are you feeling?
Oh, I'm actually this is a very interesting time for me. It's the first time in my career that I am stopping and taking stock of myself and my health, and particularly my mental health. So what I mentioned about what happened during Black Lives Matter and everything, that period of time for me was so traumatic that coming through it, I realized I have another fight on my hands, and the fight that I have right now is for myself. Yes. And so I was saying earlier on, there's a line from a play, from Shakespeare's play Richard III, where he says, "Now is the winter of my discontent." And I studied that play in school, and I remember that particular phrase because the poignancy of it. This man is saying, now is the winter of all of the bad things that have happened to me, which means that will also be the spring of my content. If there's the winter of my discontent, then it can also be the spring of my content. And it's always stuck with me. But now I've suddenly went, oh, right, okay, now I get what that means. And my drive and my focus is for me to achieve that.
Okay.
So I have been doing a lot of very targeted spiritual work on myself. Okay. I've had a changing relationship with my faith over the years. I remember losing faith because I couldn't understand why. And this was the time, actually, so we're talking about when we had the famines tearing through Ethiopia and northern East Africa. And at that time, synonymous, I was experiencing racism and and I couldn't understand. I'm like, if there's a God, what's happening? And I lost my way for quite some time. So now I'm rediscovering my faith. I'm taking time out to actually, like in previous years of my life, when I've wanted to achieve something, I've put in specific work to get it. But what people don't understand with mental health is like, so if you want to start lifting, I don't know, 300 kilos, then you start at 10 and you work your way up.
Yeah.
If you want to run a marathon, you start doing 2 miles and then you work your way up. People don't understand that with mental health, like you cannot just do one meditation session and you're fine. That would be like taking one French lesson and thinking you can speak fluent French. Yeah, exactly. So for me, I'm on a very specific path to find out who I am. Which is when you asked me that question at the start, I was like, this is the first time I've been asked that question. I actually think I know what I'm going to say to that instead.
Oh dear.
Fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much, Laura. Thank you. Just in the interest of time, but I still have just one last question. So for our listeners, we tend to just ask our guests to just leave them with like a word, like something to hold on to for our next guest coming, actually. So
got 30 seconds.
You've got 30 seconds.
Oh darn.
So for our amazing listeners, actually, what's your last word for them?
Compassion.
I love that. Just
I'm going to go with compassion.
Compassion. Okay.
Compassion towards themselves and
others.
Yeah. And very quickly as well, for the next guest coming, I think, Enoch, you say that better. What?
Yes. So what word or what phrase would you leave for our next guest?
What kind of phrase? Like a topic or?
No,
anything.
just any tip, any advice, anything you want to leave for them, and we can pass it on to them. We've got 10 seconds.
Oh!
We've got to wrap this up.
Yeah, don't be afraid to fail.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to fail.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid
And our
to
last
fail.
guest, what did they leave for Laura?
I cannot remember.
We need to remember. We're going to remember this one, so don't be afraid to fail. Don't be
start
afraid
from
to
today.
fail. Yeah, don't be afraid to fail. That's very poignant. And then, quick one. If you could tell, if 10-year-old Laura was sitting over there today, and you could tell her one quick word, what would you tell her today?
I don't have a word. Can I just say a couple of words? Is that
Okay.
Quick one.
That's fine.
Yes.
Don't worry about your hair.
That is powerful. That is powerful. I'm sure you know that means a lot,
I know.
Sade. But yep, that will be all today. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Laura.
Oh, thank you.
Laura.
That's all we have for this week, folks. Until next time.
See you next. I was gonna say see you next time, but yeah, it's see you next time.
It's been me, Enoch. It's been Sade, and it's been the amazing
Laura.
Do not worry about your hair. Thank you.
Thank you.
On your mobile phone and on all social media platforms, Jambo Radio.